Alright, everybody. Welcome to the Kingdom. We have a new series we are starting today, and I am excited to share it with you all. This series is called Relics Revealed, and this, Jim Kramer, it is good to have you here. I think you guys are going to like the content today, because this is one of those videos that's going to be a little bit different and more of an explanation and in theory crafting. But Relics Revealed, the idea behind this is that, and these videos aren't going to come out very often, they're going to come out when relics that are unique, that can create a meta of their own, come out. And they're there to inform you guys to keep an eye out for them. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but months down the road when other pieces of builds will come into play, these will play a huge part in it. As you guys can see from the title, we are focusing on the head of Mimir and Gungnir today. Alright. Now, with that said, it's important to understand what the head of Mimir and Gungnir do. And so I've got the DOT database up right now. And head of Mimir gives 24% Titan and army resist to lightning, 40% damage boost for ranger titans, and 24% Titan and troop resist against melee. Gungnir gives 24% Titan and armies resist against lightning, 40% boost for ranger titans, and Titan and troop resist against. Alright. Sorry about that, guys. I got into my monologue and I completely forgot that my screensaver came up on my phone and kicked me off my stream. Alright, so to revisit what I was saying a moment ago, the key abilities in the head of Mimir and Gungnir are not the resist against lightning or the archer damage. It is actually the resist against melee and the resist against ranged. Now, with that said, I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to King Josh over here. Not only has he been raiding me non-stop today, but he also is the inspiration for this video. So, moving forward. To understand what resist against melee and resist against ranged are truly capable of, we have to visit how damage is actually done in this game. Now, we've all seen videos on how armor and elemental resist interact. Now, the key difference between elemental resist and resist against ranged and melee is that resist against elementals is capped at 90%. The cap for resist against melee and resist against ranged, as far as I understand, is 100%. Yes, I am, Jim. That was an error of mine that I had where I just let my screensaver come up. So, if the cap on melee and resist against melee and ranged is 100%, you can technically become immune to either of those sources. Now, this has not played a big impact in the game thus far. And I'll tell you why. Currently speaking, resist against ranged is only found on 5 items altogether. And those items have very specific conditions. Those 5 items are going to be the Defender, which you no longer can get. Divine Touch, the Paladin 5-star item, which can no longer be achieved, at least currently. Shadow Dancer, which can no longer be achieved, that's the 5-star Berserker item. The Forest Bow, which came from the original Rangers event. And Gungnir, which is in the current event. So when you look at it that way, it's an incredibly rare skill. So not very impactful at the moment. But let's examine, for example, a Titan I am building up to be a great defender for me. I'm going to go over to my Matano, and we are going to see exactly what she's capable of doing. Now, with the relics that are currently in place, I have maxed out my fire, poison, and ice to resist. And I'm going to have, Force Bow is awesome, Jim. Once I level up my last item, or skill, I will have resist as well. Now, this would be considered a fairly decent Matano. But as you have seen in my previous Castle Crush videos with Siegfried, even the best Matanos can be taken down with archers that Siggy can bring, or with the right strategy. Now, Head of Mimir and Gungnir, on their own, they are pretty crappy relics. They are basically relics that buffed rangers and give some resist against lightning. I normally like my good relics to have 3 usable skills. But when combined with other relics down the road, they have the potential to break this game. Completely break it in 2. And that's because, once again, the limit is not 90%, it's 100%. You can become immune to melee and range damage. And I believe that's why the are not producing more relics like that currently. Now, the let me show you guys a little bit of theory crafting at the moment. So, I have just picked up a new Siegfried from this event. This Siegfried, I think, is the best Siegfried I can possibly get for rolls. Now, you'll notice that I've got Spearman health, Spearman armor, Archer's damage, and Archer's armor piercing. That's great. Now, what's this Siegfried great is when I get all of his Spearmen to have 100% resist against melee. Now, how I'm going to do that is pretty simple. I'm already halfway there. If I take a look at my current Siegfried, resist against melee is on the 5-star Earthshaker. 24%. When you combine that with the 24% from the head of Mimir, I'm at 48% resist against all melee damage for my Spearmen. Now, that's merely only halfway to where I need to be, but when more relics get revealed down the road, it is entirely possible to not only get the Spearmen fully resist against melee, but have archers that do massive damage behind them. Now, that's a quick look into that. But what really scares me for down the road is the Titans that are going to be able to abuse this first. Drew, I'm happy to have you here. We're discussing the head of Mimir and Gungnir today. Now, what really scares me down the road is this guy, a Berserker Paladin, Grimwald. Now, my Berserker Paladin isn't really that good at all. But, picture this, guys. Let's say I had the 5-star Berserker Relic. I now have 95% against all ranged right here on this Titan, with 1 relic slot used. Let's say that I then go and I use the other resist against melee items that I can find. Head of Mimir, for example. I have 24% resist against melee. Now, in addition to that, another item that I have that has resist against melee for Titans is one that you've seen me scroll by multiple times in the past. Good to see you, G. Radcliffe. As soon as I can get over to it, it's going to make more sense. It's right after my orbs. Alright. So here we have the Protector. You have Titan resist against melee stacked on here. Between these two items, I'm getting 40% resist against melee. What happens when Natural Motion produces 2 or 3 more resist against melees? I'm now going to have a Titan with 95% resist against ranged and 100% resist against melee. At that point, what's going to kill me? That's what I'm actually worried about. Natural Emotion is backing everybody into a corner. At its base level, resist against melee and resist against ranged are superior to any elemental resists, because they cap at 100 as opposed to 90. It would be legit, but the person who gets this will now have an undefeatable garrison. And what happens, and while these abilities have been in the game for a while, the concern to me is not so much those abilities being in the game, but what they have done with the abilities on these 2 relics. Now, I don't have either of the relics, or actually I think I do have, I don't have Gungnir, or I don't have them yet, but what makes these relics unique is the fact that the relic itself, the 3rd skill that unlocks, is resist for both ranged and melee, depending on the relic, for both type and troop. It's not an individual one. What other things to consider is, in the meanwhile, if they keep producing items like this, there are certain troops that will be able to max out faster than others. Now, there is a relic, or 2 relics that I have from back in the original Ranger event that I've leveled up one of them, but I haven't leveled up the other. We're going to go over to Forest Bow initially. Here we have Imperial's resist against ranged. You equip Gungnir with Imperial's resist against ranged, and now you've got 62% resist against range for all Imperials. One more relic could be all that it takes to push my Imperials to where they're immune to range damage. Throw on a few, and at that point I can completely ignore any elemental resist, because I am maxed out in those 2 other areas. Natural Motion's possible solutions to this may be to make a spell meta down the road where spells are actually a legit form of attacking and defending. Or they're going to have to nerf these items down the road. Now, there are very few items that have these abilities, so Head of Mimir and Gungnir are not something that you need to pick up in this event. They're not going to be something useful tomorrow, the next day, or the following day. But in other words, if Natural Motion continues down the road that they're going to be on, they're going to have more issues on their hands like they did with the Ice Maul when it first came out. Hey, that's true. But then they're just making patches. They're not fixing the problem. The problem is they made resist that capped at 100. And while it does make the game interesting at times, it's a flaw that is pretty heavy. Now, I'm looking forward to the moment when they release a ranger that buffs spearmen now. Spearmen of all troops. And that's because I'll have the head of Mimir, and I will have a unique relic back from, once again, the old days of wild arrows. Now, we know the forest bow gave Imperials resist against range, 38%. Wild arrows does the same thing for spearmen except for melee. And so, for my spearmen, I'll have nearly 62%. And if I find a way to equip my, what is it called? My 5-star champion weapon to a Titan that can use all of these items, I now have something like 80% resist against melee. And while 80% resist against melee is actually bad compared to 90% resist against any of the elemental resist, the moment you cross the 90% mark, they become infinitely better. Well, these older relics didn't know what they were doing. That's what it came down to. And so, I never leveled this because I never had a use for it. But when I saw, when Josh asked me yesterday what I thought of the final relic, I was taken back for a moment because I realized that maybe not everyone's thinking about this in the right way. Yeah, once again, they're not useful right out of the gates, but when you see what relics have been printed in the past and what they may print in the future, we're talking about unbeatable defenses. Not because they do massive amounts of damage, but because they can't take damage. And while that sounds great and fun, it's concerning to me, because that's a loophole in the game that I guarantee will be exploited until Natural Motion either has to patch it, or they make a completely new meta that somehow gets around it, like spells doing massive amounts of damage. And what I brought out Grimbold before is, what if I had a paladin that had 5 health skills, and I used my relics to max out my defense for both ranged and melee, or have 5% left I can take for damage for range. That guy's just not going to die. And so, that's my thoughts coming into this Relics Revealed, Episode 1. It concerns me. I'm going to be picking up the relics just due to what they do. But out of the gates, I don't see them being showstoppers. But they are bigger pieces of a larger puzzle down the road. Thank you for the description, Lee. Now, do you guys have any thoughts on this? Comments? I know this came out of nowhere, but actually, let me see what this thorn bow does now that I'm looking at this. Because now all of these relics from the old events. Okay, never mind. This one's pretty bad. That's another thing, Drew. I'm glad that you brought up the Valkyrie thing. Because of what I figured out with Valkyrie, that's more of a something that they'll have to print a lot more relics to do, because there are only 2 times that Valkyrie's this relic's ability is used. And the one being 36% resist to all damage. That means it stacks on everything else. Since it stacks with the resist, like you guys see on Valkyrie, I don't see that why there would be a reason that it wouldn't stack with the resist against melee and resist against ranged. Now, that is helpful to an extent, but I still think the quicker result to get to maxed relics is simply the 95% resist to range that the Berserker 5-star gives you, and then as many resist against melees as you can get. Because that 95% out of the get-go is just so much. But yeah, I will be starting up another stream here in the next about 15 minutes to continue my grind. I should be getting Odin tonight, but I wanted to make sure that this episode 1 had its own legs to stand on. So, you know, if you guys want to join me here in a moment, you're welcome to. But remember this video, because mark my words, something needs to change in the near future before Natural Motion continues to make relics like this, because they're on the path to make unstoppable titans and unstoppable troops. Anyway, thank you for visiting the kingdom. We will see you all again shortly.